Welcome to this episode of the Embryo Advocates podcast. Today, I'm joined by Leah Savas, who was formerly a reporter with World News, and she has done a lot of incredible pro-life journalism, and I'm excited to talk with her today. Welcome, Leah, to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Cassidy.
Of course. Leah, can you tell us a bit about your pro-life story and why you care about the unborn?
Yeah, so I've always known about abortion as long as I can remember. I'm sure there was a time where I had to be told about what it was, but it was always something I just remember having at the back of my mind. Like I remember visiting a pregnancy center as a little kid, and then in college I had friends that were a part of the pro-life group on campus, but I actually wasn't really involved in any sort of pro-life work until I got hired by World News Group. And they hired me specifically to report on abortion, which, thinking back, it's like, well, why, why did they hire me to report on abortion? I didn't have any like previous experience, but I do remember one of the things that my former boss and I talked about before I was hired was like, what's my passion? And I was telling them how I'm just so passionate about the family. Like that is just a institution and a unit that I think is so important in our culture and often overlooked. And I personally loved being a daughter in a Christian family, and I always wanted to be a mom. And so, yeah, so all those things combined, I think it just made sense to end up reporting on abortion, even though it wasn't necessarily what I had in mind going into my journalism career. So, yeah, so anyway, they hired me to report on abortion, and I happened to be at World during kind of some of the craziest years of the pro-life movement, just with the overturn of Roe v. Wade, and then all of the fallout from that. So I had a couple years leading up to that, and then 2021 until um, let's see, I guess 2022 until last year when I left World, it was just like a constant, like there was something happening all the time on the abortion beat. Just new developments with new state laws and these lawsuits and like misunderstanding pro-life laws and what that meant for like pregnancy centers and women who are pregnant. And yeah, it was a crazy time, but I learned a lot, and I'm so thankful for it too, just for how it helped me learn more about. Frankly, it helped me learn more about sin and the effect that sin has on the choices we make, and how we all ultimately have the same sin problem in our hearts that leads to abortion. We all have that selfishness or even anger that can result in putting ourselves before someone else. And just so reporting on abortion stories, I kind of started to see in my own heart more of the sin problem that's at the core of all of the problems in the world. So anyway, that's kind of deep, but yeah, those were some things that I really gleaned from my time reporting on abortion.
What did you study in college that kind of led the way to a journalism career?
So I did not study journalism. I was not interested in being a reporter, based on what I'd observed about, I guess, the news cycle and even journalists. I kind of had this uh, stereotype in my mind of like journalists being always out to get dirt on people and just always being stressed, and which I guess maybe that's true looking back. I'm like, yeah, I was always stressed. But I studied English, so I was just reading literature and writing about classics, which I loved my major. It was great. But yeah, I didn't learn anything specifically related to journalism until after college. I attended WJI, which stands for the World Journalism Institute, and it's put on by World. And that's how I ended up getting connected with World, learning about journalism, and recognizing through the people that were kind of teaching that class, or is a 2-week course. Through that, I started to recognize, and people encouraged me by saying, you have what it takes to be a reporter. So yeah, so that's most of where I learned actually how to be a reporter. But my writing skills I would attribute to even just being raised by my dad. Like he was a good writer, and or he is a good writer, and I was homeschooled, so I learned a lot from him and was really prepared going into college with good writing skills and stuff like that. So yeah.
That's wonderful. And I think that homeschooling is so unique in how it can prepare kids because, each parent is going to have strengths and weaknesses, right? So people picture moms being the homeschooler, but your dad had that English strength and he's like, no, I'm going to be the English teacher at home. And
Yeah.
then little did he know he's, raising a journalist who's
Yeah.
going to be doing really important work for such a time as this. So it's not like, oh, it might be nice to do some journalism on like tomato gardening, like we're going to be reporting on just an issue that is impacting so many people and destroying so many lives. And honestly, I'm sure a topic that was so difficult to write about sometimes. I bet you did research that probably led to very gruesome just things. Like I just have recently myself been listening to the audiobook about Gosnell, imagining the journalists and all the details they had to know about babies who not only were murdered during abortion, but then babies born alive and having their necks snipped, things like that, that we don't always sit and think. The only reason that information was available to me is probably because of a journalist who was willing to go deep and then make this information that was in very formal places, like in the law, put away, neatly put away, bringing it to the average person probably happened through a journalist. So, very heavy job in some ways, I'm sure.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. There were times when I was like in interviews, like talking to women who had had abortions and just in tears, like just crying with them for their experiences and especially after so I was still at World through my second pregnancy, left right before my second child was born, and especially during pregnancy, during like newborn baby years or months with my firstborn, reporting on some of this stuff, it was especially like painful just to read and to talk to people about. Like there's something about once you're once you're a mom, you're just like, I can't, like it just hits you at a new level. Like I can't believe that this is just normal, in the country. So
Yeah, having a compassionate mother's heart. I'm not a mom myself, but I have heard that it really changes something because then you become responsible for this child 24 hours a day and keeping them alive. And then thinking about other people's vulnerable children not being protected is just beyond comprehension in such a deep
yeah,
way. And I feel
exactly.
like this part of the conversation kind of leads into a question about what are the most incredible stories, like something that was really fun and exciting you got to be a part of reporting, and then some of those very heavy ones. Are there a couple that come to your mind that fit in those categories?
I would say in both categories, like the fun, exciting, and the heavy, I think usually would have to do with interviewing specific women or families about their experiences. Um, I'm trying to think about a fun and exciting. Like it's hard to think of a fun one.
That's probably true. It's not a fun issue, but maybe someone
Yeah,
changed life and it was a really happy story because everybody
yeah,
lived in the end.
yeah. Well, there were a lot of those. Like one story, for instance, that comes to my mind is about a woman who went through the abortion pill reversal process to save her unborn baby after she had begun a chemical abortion. And just hearing about, yeah, about that little baby that survived because there was a nurse there who was willing to provide progesterone treatment to help reverse the effects of the chemical abortion. Like that was such a wonderful story and so nice to hear. And this was actually a nurse in Colorado that was sued because she was providing, abortion pill reversal. So those that story, like obviously there's a heaviness to it, but stories like that were really encouraging to hear where there's a life saved as a result. Um, I would say when you said fun and exciting, I also thought about this story about a woman in Tennessee who had a very difficult pregnancy and was encouraged to abort her baby. Um, it was like her sixth child, and she had had all C-sections previously. And so this baby had implanted in her C-section scar, and she had like multiple issues during the pregnancy that put her life at risk, at least somewhat, and definitely made it seem like the baby might not make it. So through the whole pregnancy, there's just this concern that something's going to happen to one or both of them. And this was after the Dobbs decision. So there was some, the doctor like was kind of encouraging her to consider abortion, but also since it was in Tennessee, she would have had to go out of state because at the time, and I think currently they have pro-life laws in place. So it wouldn't have been technically, well, at least this doctor was saying it wouldn't have been legal, although most pro-life laws have like exceptions when the life of the mother is at risk. So anyway, but this mom was like, no, I am going to trust the Lord with this pregnancy. I'm not going to take my baby's life just because there's a possibility of something happening. Like, I'm not currently in like an emergency situation. Like, we're going to see how long we can get with this pregnancy. And she was able to successfully deliver the baby through C-section. She had to have a hysterectomy. But she survived, the baby survived. Like, it was a very scary story. But when you said fun and exciting, I'm also just thinking about like what a exciting thing to just see a mom, like, she's an everyday hero. She's just a mom in Tennessee. It's not like she's out, picketing anywhere or working in politics. Like, she is just living the life of someone who is pro-life, who cares for the unborn. And she chose to do that for her child. And as a result, her baby saw the light of day, and as far as I know, is doing well. So, that was a pretty exciting one to report on.
It's incredible. Thank God that baby was saved. That's just so beautiful. I just was talking with someone recently about the C-section scar ectopic, and she was telling me that she also was advised to have an abortion. And I was thinking a lot about the ethics of that particular situation because, of course, the pro-life movement is generally going to say that an ectopic pregnancy within the fallopian tubes we would not consider typically an abortion because there sadly is not a way that the baby's likely to survive.
Mm-hmm.
But the C-section ectopic is so different because you are in the uterus.
Yeah.
So, in theory, although it's higher risk, the baby and the mom should hopefully survive. So, I think that's a whole different ethical conversation than a
Yes.
normal ectopic, which is so complicated because
Yeah,
when I
it is.
just was talking to someone about that the other day, and it happened to her, and she was told by the doctor, you have to have what was going to be basically an abortion. They delivered the baby alive, and the baby was at too early of a term, and the baby passed away. And I was thinking a lot about the ethics of it. I was like, that's interesting. I was like, I sometimes wonder if obstetricians are really, the ones that are not pro-life, if they're thinking to themselves, what is best for the baby and the mom, or what is easiest for them? Because I thought a lot about it and I was like, I think in the mind of a doctor who wants their patient to be low risk, and OB sees the full range, right? So an obstetrician is going to have a low risk patient one day, and then the next, 10 minutes later, they're going to see their high risk patient, and they're kind of all the above. Because, in the hospital, we like to split stuff up really neat. Like over here is ICU, over here is med surg, and we fit it like, splits up, but OB is all the above. No matter what kind of risk level you are, you're an OB patient. And I was thinking about it, and I was like, I wonder if for obstetricians who don't think about the ethics of it, if they think it's easier for them to manage for that child to have their life ended than for this doctor to admit the woman to the labor and delivery unit and like watch and observe until there are signs of distress. Because I
Yes.
think that would be the most ethical solution because we don't
Yeah.
want the mom to die. We don't want her to hemorrhage and have all these complications that can go with the C-section ectopic pregnancy. But it is not medically necessary to destroy the life of the child. Early delivery could be medically necessary, but with monitoring in the hospital, which could be continuous 24 hours, right, to make sure the mom doesn't die, we could make it to viability.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that is just a very different ethical thing, and people don't even discuss that.
Yeah, no, and that's something I thought a lot about when I was reporting on these questions because, there are those exceptions for the life of the mother. But I'm thinking about like these complicated cases like this woman's, and I'm like, well, I guess technically that would have been legal, but would that have been the right thing for her to do? And, I don't think that's a right, if there is a path forward where there's a chance of the baby surviving, even if it means something inconvenient like this woman, she had to go on bed rest for a long time. And she had 5 kids already. Imagine being on bed rest with 5 kids at
Huh.
home.
Seriously.
Obviously the Lord provided for them. I think they had family nearby and stuff like that. But um, it wasn't convenient for her to try to save this baby's life, but it should never be a question of convenience or even, yeah, just ease. Like it's a matter of like laying down your life for your friend. And in this case, your friend is your child. So, um, yeah, it was meaningful to hear stories like that. And there was another woman, this one had a like a sad ending, but another woman I interviewed who also had a difficult pregnancy situation. I can't remember the specifics of it, but she was in Texas. So it was also like a state with pro-life laws where, um, yeah, there are those exceptions for the life of the mother, but she was like very passionate about wanting to give her baby a chance. And ultimately the baby didn't survive, but she still, I don't like, based from what I remember, she didn't regret it at all. Like it was sad to think about, like looking back at the whole pregnancy and thinking about losing her son. But ultimately, she was glad that she had that chance to actually fight for her child and do everything that she knew that she could do to try to give him a chance to live. And she's thankful for that time that they had with him in the hospital before he died. Uh, and I think a lot of people who are facing difficult pregnancies would think, oh, well, it would be easier to just have an abortion and have it over with. It's kind of like a form of control, like they just want to have control over the situation and be able to avoid the grief that comes with, kind of hoping that it's going to work out, but then ultimately the baby's still dying, like this woman had to face. But even though she didn't have that sort of control, at least she gave up control to the Lord and was able to, um, yeah, give her baby the best chance she had, and had time with that child, like grieving the child, and getting to see and know, look, I did what I could for you. So anyway, that was another story, but that's like, I guess, on the sad side of the question that you were asking. It was more of a sad story, but it was also just really meaningful for me to hear a mom that has gone through the thick of it. She's been through it, and that's how the Lord used it. So
Yeah. As you're telling that story, I'm thinking about the woman who told me about her C-section scar at type of pregnancy. She has no idea that I have done pro-life work because I met her in a different setting. But it was as she was describing it, what she told me she has to do, because of course she went through with what she describes as a termination. She went into the hospital. It was not the hospital I've ever worked at, but a hospital in Grand Rapids, and they removed the baby before the baby was at term. So there's an argument there for maybe maternal fetal separation, that maybe it could be ethical because maybe she wasn't going to make it. But it's interesting because she was talking about how every year now she tries to take that day off from work. There's a lot of grief, a lot of sadness, and they have named this baby. They talk about the baby in their family. And I wonder if there's a pretty different experience there for her versus the person that you're describing. Because I think in the heart of the mom, I just think grief is different if you do everything that you can for a baby, like everything that's possible with whatever diagnosis they have or whatever treatment plan they have to go with the doctor. I think it's just different the way a mom feels when she did absolutely everything in her power to save them versus the way a mother feels who knows that she voluntarily stopped trying to facilitate survival for the child. That I think is a completely different form of devastation. So
mm-hmm.
it was very interesting to meet that woman in that place, right? Where sadly I'm having this conversation with her several years after. I can't save her child at this point in this conversation, but I think it's something women don't even consider that. First of all, there are so many options. There are second opinions available. We don't even
Yes,
think about that. But also,
totally.
like, there's an option for life in a lot of these difficult pregnancies. But I don't know that all obstetricians are of the mindset to really make it clear
Yeah.
that there are life affirming options, which
Yeah,
is really
there are. Yes. No, I definitely saw that in some of the conversations I had with women who had either like complications like that, where there's nothing wrong with the baby, but there's something wrong with the way, like, the way the placenta is growing into the uterus, or the way the baby's growing. But I've also talked to women who have had babies with like disabilities who, as soon as there's like this diagnosis of a trisomy, like trisomy 13 or 18, the doctors are like, oh, let's schedule your termination, and they're like, wait a second. Why are you automatically scheduling me for this, or like suggesting that I should do this? Like, I want to give this baby a chance, even though the baby is at, high risk of dying. Again, I want to give this baby a chance. And like you were saying, there's just a lack of understanding among a lot of physicians of like what the other options are, and just a huge aversion to risk. So I actually was hearing about like this was maybe over a year ago by now, but there's some studies that show that for babies with like these fatal, or what people would call a fatal diagnosis, which you don't know, like there are babies that have survived for years with like trisomy 13, trisomy 18, even though most of them die. Like some children have survived with this, so to call it an automatically fatal diagnosis, that's not accurate. But anyway, so these studies have shown that the kind of the biggest deciding factor in whether or not a baby with a trisomy survives after birth is whether or not they have a diagnosis before birth. So like if doctors know beforehand that this baby is unlikely to survive, they will do less to help the baby survive. But if they don't know that the baby has this condition, then they'll fight more. They'll try to find out what's going on, and they'll give the baby a better chance. So it's just crazy that that's the case. But it's like you were saying, these professionals, like, thank God for the work that they do, but they don't know everything. They're not God. So, and they have biases and experiences that lead them to make certain calls that really aren't always the best calls. So
It's
yeah.
true. I'll show my biases too a little bit.
Yes.
In my healthcare career, I've gotten to work in critical care. And so one thing I've learned by talking to some of the intensivists, so the doctors that run the ICU, is, different doctors have beef with different doctors. Like, I can't believe
Yeah.
you do this, and I can't believe you do that. So
Mm-hmm.
one thing the intensivists say about other doctors is I've heard them say, well, surgeons, they just want everything to be perfect. They want a perfect ideal world. They have a hard time accepting when things are not going as planned. Intensivists, of course, this person, is biased because he is one. He's like,
Yes.
intensivists accept that the world is not ideal. And watching the ICU doctors take really amazing care of patients in extremely high risk situations and watching them take the risk knowing we may not save them, right? So we're going to resuscitate, we're going to run a half-hour long code, we're going to do CPR, we're going to shock them, like whatever it takes to really try to give them a full opportunity to be revived, even though some of them are not going to make it. That is kind of the spirit of critical care of like, let's take the risk. They have a word or a phrase they use. They say, let's use all the tools in our toolbox to really try to help this patient. And of course, we also respect comfort care for like the 90-year-old grandmother who doesn't want us to break her ribs. So it's not like we're going to do this
Yeah.
to everybody because
Yeah.
90-year-old grandmas may not want that. But it's very interesting that I think obstetricians, because they are part surgeon, right? Like they go in and they do C-section, so they are surgeons. I wonder if the surgeon idealism in them is like they want an ideal pregnancy. And of course, don't we
Yeah.
all? We want all women to feel safe and low risk in pregnancy. We don't wish complications on anyone, but
No.
it's a fallen world and there are
Yeah.
diseases out there, and there are specialty pregnancy diseases too, which is supposed to be what obstetricians specialize in solving, not by killing the child, but by solving the disease, hopefully,
Yeah.
or managing it as much as
Yeah.
possible. So I
Mm-hmm.
wonder if in obstetrics there is something they could learn from critical care, like these ICU
Yeah.
doctors I work with who are very like, bring it on. You know what? Another
Yeah,
code, bring
exactly.
it on. We'll handle it. We'll deal with it. We'll resuscitate them and we'll line them and we'll try everything and all the medications and we'll intubate them. And there's
Yeah.
just something about that kind of almost like pioneering spirit of like, let's
Yeah.
just try.
Yeah,
Uh,
exactly.
I wonder if that's just missing and if obstetricians could be benefited from maybe more education about critical care. And maybe they're just so afraid of it that it actually maybe makes them more prone to promote abortion.
Yeah, that could be. I mean, I don't know, but that makes sense to me. I have heard like, the whole, oh, you know, they can tend to be risk averse, but I guess that depends doctor by doctor. Some are probably less risk averse than others, but yeah, that makes sense to me. I'm all
Yeah.
for that.
For sure. And I think if we're trying to end abortion, if we're going to fight against abortion, then we have to have like, we can't be so risk averse. Like, I don't think it's possible because unfortunately, it exists in a fallen world. So
Yes.
unless we have a perfect world with perfect bodies where we
Yeah.
don't get sick, then
Hmm.
that's not possible. So really, I think part of being, I would imagine, I'm not a physician, right? But I would imagine part of being pro-life as an obstetrician or even just being ethical should mean that you're willing to take on the risk of doing everything you can to save each mom and baby, even
Yeah,
if that means early delivery. But
exactly.
that's going off on a tangent a bit.
Yeah.
So,
Sorry.
reining it back in a little bit.
Yeah.
So, we're talking about your career at World, and you were mentioning that you got this job at a really incredible time in history. So, what was the
Mhm.
year you were hired to World?
Yeah, so I started at World in 2019. So I was an intern for a summer, and then in I think it was like September is when I started full time. And then that next spring, 2020, that's when COVID happened. So
Mhm.
that was a crazy season, just COVID. And there was a lot going on with the abortion issue with COVID too, because that's when abortion pills by mail just like took off with, yeah, it just took off. I remember even especially like in the UK, that was a huge thing because they had like changing laws about how women could access abortion pills and then even here in the United States there are these websites that started popping up of like they'll ship abortion pills to you and aid access was um, if I remember correctly I think it was aid access was like getting a lot more orders for abortion pills from US women and yeah. And then, yeah, the next year, or is it the next year? I'm trying to think. No, it was 2 years later, 2020. Yeah, 2022 is when the Dobbs decision happened. So, it's like all this COVID stuff and then Dobbs and then, it's just like constant. Everything's changing like every week, it seemed like, with state laws and lawsuits. Um, and then all of these stories that started coming up about like women who are dying because of pro-life laws in states and just kind of like yeah I remember just having to pick through the weeds of a lot of those stories and get to the bottom of like okay what's really going on here. Is it really because of the pro-life laws? Are people actually like are doctors actually confused about what the laws say, or are they just kind of being activists? I don't know. It is hard to say. It's hard to say for sure. But yeah, there was a lot going on. But anyway, I kind of went on a tangent again.
Tangents are good. That's where you get like all these great thoughts out.
Yeah.
I totally feel you. Okay, so you're talking about the start of your career. It's 2019. So
Yeah.
can you tell me a little bit about, because I'm sure you ended up writing about this, what was the role of COVID in deregulating the abortion pill, and how do you think that's still affecting us now?
Yeah. Oh man, I'm trying to go back in my mind. Trying to remember some of the things from COVID. Well, I just remember I'm trying to remember how like the different laws coincided with like actual events in COVID, but it was definitely kind of because of COVID that a lot of these changes to like the in-person requirements happened. So like it used to be that women had to receive the abortion pill in person from a physician before being able to take it. But then removing the in-person requirement was supposed to be like a safety measure during COVID. Like, oh, we don't want, COVID exposure. So women should be able to just get it like without seeing a physician in person. Um, and yeah, and that was a lot of kind of the excuse behind it. Um, and then I think it was like allowing mail order pharmacies to enter into the, you know, kind of the abortion pill distribution um, realm. I'm trying to think of the right word for that. The market. um, like I was saying, I can't remember exactly how much of it happened during like the thick of COVID, but it was almost like as a result of COVID, there's all these requirements removed, and all this excuse for mail order abortion groups to kind of pop up and start a market um, and make headway in actually selling abortion pills to women and being allowed to do that under the law. So yeah, yeah. So it definitely was just the changing regulations. It was very political under the Biden administration, especially how they were pushing for these. Oh, women shouldn't have to go in. They should just be able to receive these pills in the comfort of their own home without having to risk exposure or even just, the inconvenience of going somewhere. It can come right to their mailbox. But there are certainly problems with that, as we've found out since then. So, but yeah, I apologize. I can't remember exactly like how closely it corresponded with the actual thick of COVID. Um, yeah. But I remember even better, like in the UK, that was specifically because of COVID that they removed these in-person requirements for women to get the abortion pill. And then there was a man I was interviewing back then who was actually research. I think he did like these undercover studies where some women, like actresses, would call in to try to order abortion pills by following the new regulations, and they were still able to get them at their homes. And as a result, there was like increasing visits to the emergency room, just devastating results as because of these changes in the regulations. So there's safety requirements for a reason. So yeah, it was too bad to see all that, but
Even today, it's such a deregulated market for the abortion pill. It's very dangerous for women because I'm sure you know from having your two children that one of the first things they do is they perform an ultrasound when they find out that you're pregnant because they're going to check and see, is this baby even in your uterus? Because it's possible it could be in your fallopian tube, could be in your abdominal cavity somewhere. Just going to check, are you in the
yeah,
right part of the body? Because if you take an abortion pill and the baby's in the fallopian tube, or if it's an abdominal pregnancy, that's just going to cause hemorrhaging and the baby is not going to come out.
yeah,
So you're just going to hemorrhage and hemorrhage and hemorrhage until you
mm-hmm.
either pass out and
Yeah,
hopefully don't die. I mean, in theory, that could happen. Or you
yeah,
go to the ER and then they treat you for that.
yeah, yeah,
Um, so very dangerous to women's survival, what has happened with the abortion pill. And women really deserve better health care than this extreme deregulation that has taken place.
yeah.
So we're looking through your career. We're in 2020. COVID really impacts the abortion pill. I'm sure that was part of what you were writing about at the time. And we're starting to move in 2021, which I would be curious if you had any specialty journalist knowledge about Dobbs coming. Because I remember I was hearing little whispers like, oh, I think something's coming to the Supreme Court. But you know how like the pro-life movement is very hopeful, right? So
Yeah.
like, oh, I was like, are we just being kind of hopeful? It's actually coming, is actually occurring. So what were you hearing in 2021 and what were you reporting on kind of leading up to Dobbs?
I do remember, I think I remember talking about Dobbs with some people. I think specifically from Americans United for Life. So before it came to the Supreme Court. Um, and I don't remember if I wrote about it, but I feel like I remember talking about it at least in an interview. Um, but that was actually the year 2021. That was the year where I think I was just struggling to like find stories. I was like, what's even going on, in the pro-life movement? Because I'd for a couple of years been writing about like COVID and how pregnancy centers were reacting to COVID and then like what you're talking about, the abortion pill by mail and things like that. But then 2021, I remember, so I got married that summer, and it was like a month after I got married, I wrote about like the pro-life flag that was designed, which, I mean, it was kind of interesting, but it was also like, is this really like newsworthy? But there just wasn't too much happening. And then all of a sudden, yeah, like you were saying, here we have the Dobbs decision. And there's always that question of like, is this going to be it? Like, are we going to see an overturn of Roe v. Wade? And like you're saying, like the pro-life movement can tend to be pretty hopeful. But in the end, that's ultimately what happened, was an overturn of Roe v. Wade. And uh, yeah, so that really took up the next year that decision came out, and I guess leading up to it, because I was trying to figure out what's going to happen if if Roe gets overturned, like what's going to happen state by state. So I was looking into like the states that have, or that at least at the time had laws from before Roe v. Wade that were still on the books, like those would go back into effect, or at least supposedly, even though that didn't end up happening. Like in Michigan, unfortunately, with the overturn of Roe v. Wade, there was a time when that law was like, oh, I think it is back in effect, like abortion facilities were turning patients away. Like the one in Grand Rapids was sending people away. Like, no, Roe is overturned. We have this old law in the books. Like, we can't perform abortions. But then these court cases come up, and like, especially in states with uh, like liberal pro-abortion politicians in power, they're fighting as like a governor. They're fighting their own state's law, and bringing it to court to try to get it off the books. And then, uh, the lawmakers also changing the laws. So it was hard to keep track of all of that going on. But leading up to it, no, I don't think in 2021, I don't think I would have predicted that for the next year. But, I was also somewhat new to the beat. So it's not like I had any expertise exactly. I was just following along with everyone else, like, what's going to happen? What's the next move? So, yeah.
Around that same time was when Teresa Bukovnak and Lauren Handy found the box of aborted children
Oh my goodness.
in
Yes.
Washington, D.C. Is that something you reported on?
Yes, it was. I remember that. Thank you for bringing that up.
Of course. That was a crazy time, right? Because that happened,
Yeah.
like, I want to say a few months before the leak of Dobbs, and then Roe versus Wade
Yes,
overturned. So this is like all a very busy time in the public relations of the pro-life movement.
totally. Oh man. Yeah, I remember that weekend. I can't remember what day of the week it was that the news first broke about Lauren having the babies in her apartment. And, like the headlines were super weird about it. Like it was almost like she was up to something. And I remember hearing it and being like, well, she knows Monica Miller. And I remember I had read Monica when I first started my work as a pro-life reporter. I read Monica Miller's like memoir, or yeah, I think it was her memoir, just about her pro-life work and how she would store like all these aborted babies in her apartment to give them proper burials. And so once I heard that, Lauren had these babies in her apartment, I was like, it's probably because she's going to bury them. You know what I'm saying? It's not like it wasn't weird. I mean, it's sad, but it's not like it was weird to me that she had them.
Right.
So I was like, I know there has to be something more going on here. It's not like she's some weirdo that's just like storing these babies. So I remember, yeah, just I was talking with like my editors and stuff, and I'm like, oh my goodness, look at what happened. Like, we got to make sure we get the real story of what's happening. So it was cool being able to hear from Lauren and Teresa about how they got the aborted babies from like the medical waste truck driver. And then they were like examining them and seeing what had happened to them. And it looked like, according to some medical professionals, it looked like they had been aborted in violation of federal laws. Like I mean, it's terrible enough that they're being aborted at all, but the fact that there's potential law breaking going on, it's just shocking that. And I don't even know, like, are those babies still at the medical examiner's office?
As
Have
far
you?
as I know, yes,
Yeah.
but I haven't followed it so closely that I'm 100% sure. But as far as I know, the bodies have not been discarded, but also have not been properly handled.
Yes, isn't that crazy? You would, yeah, it's so political. If it was anything, like if it was children, like they are children, but if it was born children and it was their bodies, like that would be preposterous to anybody. The fact that it was these bodies would be sitting in this this government office for years at this point without any real action being taken. That's ridiculous. But yeah, I remember that. And I remember like I was going to a friend's bridal shower that weekend. So trying to like balance like, okay, I have to have a phone call with, Lauren or Teresa. And I'm also going to this bridal shower back in my hometown. It was like kind of a crazy weekend. But it was nice to be able to give like their side of the story instead of the very, I don't know. Yeah. Yeah. The pro abortion media definitely handled that differently than than we were allowed to, because we're at World, are a very very pro life publication. So we wanted to give their side of the story. So yeah.
And that's, I think, that's just a great example of why pro-life media is so extremely important.
Mm-hmm.
Because when we have these hit pieces being written on an activist that found the body of a deceased infant, and we're saying, well, Lauren must like having deceased people in her house, like just trying to frame it in any angle to make it
Yeah.
look like there's something suspicious about her. What should make us suspicious is that abortionists have the bodies of dead babies at their abortion clinic. We should be
Yeah.
suspicious every day of every state and every city where that happens.
Yeah.
Not the one pro-life activist who says, okay, tragically, 3,000 abortions happen every day in America, and I happen to find only some of those bodies. Like,
Yeah.
I think there were something like 115 bodies, if I even remember the number correctly. Does that sound
Yeah.
right to you?
Yeah. I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, 115. Like, right? And there are all these precious children that are dying every day. And the pro-abortion media is going to frame it as, all right, character assassination, attack them. Let's try to like
Yeah.
dox
They're
them and
weirdos. Yeah.
do
Yeah.
whatever we can to characterize them as in some way unstable and unethical.
Mhm.
Why do we give such a free pass to the abortionist that
Mhm.
those who expose their crimes are the ones
Yeah.
who character we try to assassinate? So I'm so
Yeah.
grateful for the work you did, that you were trying to really show the pro-life side. And even just the fact that you wrote about them honors those babies' lives that were so short. That abortion
Mhm.
clinic was so notorious. I want to say it was what is the name of that abortion clinic?
Oh, Sur-
Capital
yeah, Surgery
something.
Center. Isn't it the
Yeah, Surgery Center.
Washington Surgery Center or
The
something?
Washington Surgery Center, right?
Angelo's facility. Yeah.
Santangelo. Yep. So he was
Yeah.
this gruesome abortionist who
Yeah.
had harmed many women. It's just devastating that he had gotten away with so many. And honestly, saying the same thing I said earlier, it goes back to Gosnell, right? He was also getting away
Mhm.
with extraordinarily unacceptable things that he was doing to women and babies, committing infanticide. But because it's this specific issue of abortion, we don't hold them to the same medical standards
Yeah.
as other practices. And so it's extremely crucial to have voices like yours raising, in support of protecting life and exposing this atrocity that happened to these poor children.
Yeah. Yeah.
So a little while after that, eventually there was the leak that apparently Roe versus Wade is going to overturn it. I don't know about you, but I first saw the leak and I actually thought, I was like, this could be wrong though. Like we could
Yeah.
be misled into thinking like, oh, I'll be so excited Roe versus Wade is overturning. They've been trying to overturn this for, like 50 years. Like I would love for Roe versus Wade to overturn, but
Yeah.
this has been the big project of the pro-life movement from, since before I was born. Are we
Yeah.
sure we really made it to that moment? I wasn't 100% sure we'd made it. So
Yeah.
what was that like for you when that occurred? I assume, did you like go to Washington, D.C. and start writing a lot of articles about what was going on?
So we had some reporters in Washington, so I was able to stay. I was in Grand Rapids, Michigan at the time, but working a lot with some of the people in Washington the staff there. Um, so yeah, I remember there was one reporter that was, I can't remember if she was there during the leak um, or when Roe was actually overturned. I think maybe it was the leak, but she went to um, the Supreme Court and was like getting audio of all the protesters, because it was a crazy time. It was a crazy time. Um, but yeah, that was definitely. I'm trying to remember even what I thought. I can't remember if I was convinced that it would actually stick or not. I don't know. It's been too long. I can't remember. I can't remember if I was skeptical or thought that it would be very similar to what the final decision was.
Did you read the leaked draft?
Yes.
Did. What were
Yeah,
your thoughts
I
about it
think
when you read that?
I did. I hope I did. But yeah, I'm pretty sure. Because I remember like uh it actually might have been another news outlet had like a comparison of the two. So it was interesting seeing like the leak versus the full version, and it was very similar. Like the real only real changes I remember were like footnotes or like references to the dissents. So like Alito was talking about Justice Alito was talking about or responding to some comments from like the dissenting opinions. But overall, it was very similar to what actually came out as the final opinion. And I wonder if that was partially political. Maybe maybe they would have made more changes if it hadn't been leaked. I don't know. It's hard to say. And they also, as far as I know, haven't released any information about who leaked it. So that's someday there's going to be like in 50 years, there's going to be a movie about it, probably. We'll find out.
Right.
Yeah.
So the leak happens, and then Roe versus Wade overturns, like
Mhm.
1 month later. What was it like to cover the overturning of Roe versus Wade in the pro-life media?
Yeah. I think what surprised me was how many people were worried just about getting standard care during pregnancy because of the overturn of Roe v. Wade. Um, I just had I had and it was weird also seeing so many like just friends on social media who never talked about abortion really before this, just blasting the opinion or um, kind of fear mongering about like what's going to be happening as a result of the overturn of Roe v. Wade. I was not ready for that. I think I I must have known that this would be an issue because some of these questions of like the woman's life being at risk, like that's always kind of been at least one thread in the conversation about abortion. But it took such a prominent role that a lot of what I ended up reporting on, I had to become pretty familiar with like questions about complications and like what possible complications there are during pregnancy and what the standard of care is. Like, is abortion really the standard of care for these things? Is abortion the same thing as like inducing labor early in a high risk pregnancy? Is it the same thing as removing a baby that's implanted ectopically? Um, yeah, so it became a very medical field, like a very medical beat, for me at least, having to get familiar with this terminology and and yeah, just these conditions and the discussion. And it's crazy how even though it's a science, it's a scientific, you're talking about doctors, it's so political, like so political. And it's hard to sift through all of that politics and the emotions involved with the abortion issue. Yeah, it was very difficult. And I still struggle to understand, I think, like the whole life of the mother question, like we were talking about before with the C-section scar issue. Um, how much of it is someone like a doctor's aversion to risk versus a legitimate, well, I mean, I guess there's always probably some legitimacy to a concern for the life of the mother, but isn't every pregnancy somewhat a concern for a mother's life? There's always a risk, you know? So yeah, and then I remember, I'm sorry, another tangent, but do you remember that woman who, Kate Cox, she made the headlines for seeking an abortion in Texas, even though abortion, there's pro-life laws in Texas. Well, ultimately, from reading her case, there was no like unique complication that she was facing. The complication she was concerned about was having another C-section, which that many women face that. And is that Is that a valid reason to get an abortion? No. But her reason for seeking it was because the baby was um, had a poor diagnosis and was unlikely to survive. So it was almost like she just wasn't willing to risk another C-section for a baby that was unlikely to make it. But that's not
Right.
a
She
life
did
of the mother.
totally.
Yeah.
She totally pulled the life of the mother card, right? I
Yeah.
actually watched her full speech at the Democratic National Convention because she did get up to the roaring applause of, like, I am supporting Kamala Harris for president because women need to have health care. And I almost died from not having my health care. And so then
Yeah.
I started to go deep because, right, I even tried to read some pro-abortion media on her because I was like,
Yeah.
okay, let me read the pro-abortion source. Where is it? Do you have high blood pressure? Are you going to have a stroke? Did you go into
Yeah.
cardiac arrest while you were pregnant? Like, I'm really trying to find this
Yeah.
part that matches what you've said. Because every
Hmm.
single thing you've revealed about your pregnancy says basically, me and my husband do not want to raise a disabled child.
Yeah.
That is not a threat to your survival. That's a threat to
Yeah.
your lifestyle, which now
Yeah.
we're starting to talk about a different ethical problem. We're talking about
Yes.
people who are not willing to risk their comfort and safety in order to not murder their own child who is
Yeah.
going to inconvenience them. And
Hmm.
when I looked at so many different media sources, because I was about to make a video about it, and I was like, I don't want to be uninformed when I make this video. I
Yeah.
don't want to make a
Yeah.
claim that she wasn't in danger if she was, because I'm also not
Yes.
uncompassionate.
Hmm.
Having my background of working in critical care, I've seen women with obstetric complications. I have a
Yeah.
ton of compassion for them, and I really do feel for them. But when
Yeah.
I found that even the pro-abortion media cannot make a case
Yes.
why she was going to die,
Yeah.
I was like, okay, so life of the mother is something that the pro-abortion media really likes to grip onto. And I love
Hmm.
that your approach to seeing that wasn't, oh, I gotta take my hands off. Because I have seen pro-lifers do that. I actually was at a pro-life outreach and we were all like these paid pro-life activists there to spread the pro-life message and talk to people on the street about abortion. And this man
Hmm.
who had a lot of experience doing pro-life outreach had a conversation with someone. And I could hear him saying to the person, he's like, oh, no, that's okay. We support medically necessary abortions for women. And I'm
Yeah.
like, what? That is such a broad statement.
Yeah.
People don't
Can
know
you
what you're
define
talking
that?
about. They
Yeah.
don't know if you mean, you know what, I had a little anxiety today, so I'm having an abortion at 9 months.
Yeah.
They don't know what you mean by saving the life of the mother. And we can put a lot of things in there. If we put mental health in there, that can literally mean having a small amount of anxiety to justify abortion. And
Yeah.
it has been used that way
Hmm.
before when we define mental health as the same as physical health in these laws.
Yeah.
So I just was like, that is such a lack of precision and a lack of thinking about like these medical processes. And so
Yeah.
um, I appreciate how you went deep, and I would be so curious, like, what were some of those things you found as you did the research about women's health and the life of the mother, and what kind of conclusions have you come to about life of the mother cases? Do you believe there's such a thing as medically necessary abortion? When I say abortion, I don't mean induction of labor, then the baby
Okay.
goes to the NICU, right? I mean like intentionally dismembering them or poisoning them.
No, I don't think that there is ever a good reason to do that. And I really tried to push, like in talking with specifically pro-life physicians, I really tried to push for that answer. I wanted to know, is there ever a situation where it is like better for the mom to dismember the baby when taking the baby out? But no, as far as I was able to learn from talking with doctors, and obviously it's mostly pro-life physicians that I was talking to because the pro-abortion groups don't want to talk to a pro-life reporter, unfortunately. Um, but yeah, even the ones that I would say, like the pro-life physicians who were a little more lenient on this question, um, it didn't seem like there was any situation where it was actually medically superior to like inducing labor early or performing a C-section. There are obviously maybe inconveniences to that for the mom, like having a C-section scar and the recovery that comes with that. But um, a lot of them would talk about like the mental health benefits of being able to, like we were talking about earlier, know that you tried everything you could for your baby. Um, so yeah, so as far as I gathered, there was never really a good reason for performing an abortion as opposed to doing another form of like separating the mom and the baby. Um, yeah, I've yet to be convinced of. And I don't honestly, like personally, I think just learning about a lot of these things just gave me a greater appreciation for just the Christian mindset of like being following Christ's example in these situations. Um, I know it's really hard to imagine having to, like, I already have two children. Like if I were to have another baby and face like a complicated pregnancy and possibly dying, like yes, my children, I would be scared for them not having their mom. I would feel so bad to not be there for them. But like that woman I interviewed who in Tennessee was encouraged to have an abortion because her baby was in the C-section scar. What I remember what she told me was we decided, that God was going to take care of whoever remained. Even if I were to die, God would take care of our family. Um, and I think people, yeah, that's just so foreign to people, like in kind of a human mindset. We think, oh, but these kids need their mom, or this woman, it's better if she lives than if her baby lives. Like, who are we to make those calls? Like, it's the Lord who determines who lives and who dies, and He set the example for us in Christ sacrificing His life to take the punishment that sinners deserve. Like greater love has no one than this, that a man lay down his life for his friends. So yeah, so this whole conversation about like the life of the mother, as someone who like was wanting to become a mother at the time, and at the tail end of my career was a mom, like of born and unborn children. It just forced me to really think a lot about, if I were in this situation, what would I do? Um, and really, I think I know that it would be scary, and I hope that I would stand firm to my convictions. But my conviction is that a mom should fight for her child. You would fight for your born child. So fight for your unborn child too. Um, yeah, that's what I came to in all of this.
Moms are so sacrificial. And I think that's actually the thing that our current culture struggles with so much
Yes.
because
Mm-hmm.
this is a little bit of a controversial take, and I'm not trying to offend you if you don't hold my same view. It's okay if you don't. But I do think this is an impact of feminism on our culture.
Oh
And
yeah.
I think, okay, I wasn't sure if like you're all that same wavelength or not, but so, feminism kind of gave us this mindset that women we matter, but almost like in a narcissistic way.
Sure.
Like, I am so important that it's okay for me to step on other people. It's okay for me to be really cruel to men because I'm better than men. Just putting yourself in this mindset that, like, by
Yeah.
nature being an adult female, I am just like above other people. And I
Yeah.
think it just does something. Like, it almost is like women, I believe God put it in us to love and care for children, not just like your own biological children, but I'm over here, someone who's not a mom, and I can tell you, like, times that I've worked in hospitals and I've gotten to care for newborn infants. I did not gestate that person. Okay. I picked them up and I'm just like, I need to protect you and I need to defend you and keep you safe. And they cry. And I tell you that, like, they say that moms and babies have this connection where it raises cortisol in the mom. I have cortisol. That is not my child. And I feel cortisol in my body when the
Yes.
child is screaming. And I'm supposed to do something about that. And I think it is a disorder when we do not feel for children. Like,
Mhm.
legitimately, it could be a mental illness if we do not feel compassion for a child or their cries. And so I think there's just something feminism has done to our culture where women really believe that I will absolutely sacrifice life of my child for so many different reasons, not just because, like, there are these cases where there's legitimate misunderstanding. I'm not saying a mom who is basically tricked into it by her doctor, where the doctor's like, you're
No.
gonna die, and maybe it's not real.
Yes.
Maybe that's not legitimate, and she didn't get the second opinion because she didn't know to do it. But
Yes.
I'm specifically talking about like the Kate Cox example
Yeah.
where if I remember the story correctly, she only had one previous C-section, one other child, one previous
I
C-section.
think it was two. It
Oh,
was
was
two.
it two? Okay,
Yeah.
so it could have been her third.
Yes.
That's not considered especially high risk to have three low risk pregnancies that you're having a C-section for. Maybe if you're
Mhm.
having like your 10th C-section or your 20th C-section, we go, oh, yeah, like look at that. That's really high risk. But it's just like your third, there
Yeah.
are plenty of women that have
Sure.
three
Yeah.
C-sections and go
Hmm.
on to survive.
Hmm.
And there are plenty of people who raise a disabled child. There's actually a ton of support for that. So in her case, like I really think it's a very strong example of the effect of feminism on women, where we believe that not only should we not feel for the screams of a child and their needs, we should actually violently dismember them if they threaten our lifestyle.
Hmm.
That is just different. Like there's some
Yeah.
sadistic behavior there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Very
Hmm.
troubling.
Yes, it is. It is sad. And I've seen even how feminism, like I'm not a feminist. And I don't want to be a feminist. I'm very much I'm very much for the traditional like Christian structure of a family and a wife being submissive to her husband and loving her children, her husband, and serving in the home. Like, obviously, I worked outside of the home, and I hope to one day get more into writing again once the kids are a little older. But I'm very much not a feminist, but I can see how still some of the messages of feminism have creeped into my mind, and even as a mom, it can affect how I act around my children and how I act with my husband. Like, so easily I can run into this mindset of like, oh, why am I the one that has to get up at night to feed the baby? Well, I'm the one with mammaries. Like my husband my
Can't
husband
help you with
cannot
that
nurse.
one.
He cannot lactate. Like there's some clear reasons why I'm the one feeding the baby in the middle of the night. So um but just those questions that come up in my mind sometimes, those questions of things I see on social media, like, why is it the man that gets to leave all of the mess and the crying at home and go to a job, like, and the woman is drowning in in diapers and dirty dishes and stuff like that. Well, like, this is I like, as a mom now, like, I'm full time with my children at home, definitely in the thick of bottles and diapers and laundry and dishes. And yes, my husband helps me with all these things, but it's my job. Like, this is my job. People who for whatever reason have to have two incomes, they still have to find someone to take care of all of these things. Some people have to pay someone to watch their children. Some people have to pay for a house cleaner. Like, all the things I do are things that other people get paid to do. So it's not like it's a worthless pursuit or worthless activities that I'm taking part in, but I can still kind of demean them in my own mind because of these messages that come in about, oh, like, you should be able to pursue your dreams and have you time and like do what you love to do and have your perfect body and like have it all. And I did work full time for about 10 months with my firstborn. And it's hard to have it all. It's hard to have kids and to have a career. Um, that's very, it's difficult, and you're always giving something up. So just that message of like, women should be able to have it all. It's just a lie. None of us should be able to have it all. We have all we need if we have Christ. But if we're looking anywhere else, no, you're not having it all. just accept it. That's just how it is.
Right.
Yeah.
There's this psychoanalyst who's become more popular recently. She's been interviewed by some conservative media, and her name is Erica Komisar. And she has this interesting saying that I think has a lot of truth. She says, women can have it all, but not at the same time.
Sure.
Kind of like, God has given you all these amazing like communications gifts and you're a very gifted and capable writer. So you can have it all as a writer you did before, like you had them. And then maybe you have this season of, focusing more on their needs and being at home with them. And then maybe at some point you'll be back full time again, so you can have
Yeah.
it all, but not at the same time.
Yes, exactly. It's very and it's also very hard to have it all when it comes to like sleep and getting enough water.
Right.
My son likes to drink out of my cup, so every once in a while I'll be like, "Oh, it's empty. I'm thirsty," but he drank out of my Yeti. It's all gone.
That is so funny. Aw.
Have it all, especially with a 2-year-old.
Aw.
Yeah.
Yeah, moms are just always sacrificing in so many ways. And you're right that our culture just has this message, honestly, of like all about self-fulfillment. And I think
Mhm.
God does care about our desires. I don't think our desires are like this nothingness that's like anti-spiritual. I think our desires do matter to God when we want to do this or that kind of work, or we want to develop this or that interest. Like I think that matters to him for sure.
Yeah.
But we
Yeah.
just think sometimes life is just, from what I've heard, I'm not a mom, right? But like when you have little kids, it's just a lot of sacrifice, a lot of the,
Yeah.
small but faithful work. And I think
Mhm.
feminism actually has convinced us that when moms are caring for children, they're not doing work, which
Yeah.
is crazy because
Yeah.
it is some of the hardest work on this planet. And I have heard it described by people that women have actually lost a level of their toughness because they don't want to raise children. So,
Mhm.
in some ways, clocking into a job and handing your child to someone else to be cared for, and I'm not like condemning that in all circumstances, but let's just say that that was what we're doing 5 days of the week, and like, maybe you're not with your child very much. In
Yeah.
some ways, that's easier
Yeah.
because
Oh,
it
yeah.
is intensely hard work to
Mhm.
care for your child, to meet their needs, to wash the dishes, to make sure they're well clothed and change their outfit 5 times when they go to the bathroom. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
it's a lot of work. And I
Yeah.
think that's kind of the secret side of feminism that people don't talk about is we've really deeply devalued the work of mothers. And mothers
Yeah.
do work hugely.
Mhm.
And their work is probably harder than that of a CEO
Yeah.
at any given organization.
Yeah. Well, definitely harder in the sense of like it's unsung. Like you're not getting promotions, you're not getting raises, Like I don't get feedback from any employees or coworkers, you know. And if I do, technically it's my son saying that he wants to go color with chalk more or like it's just not the kind of feedback that you would be getting like in a work setting.
For
But
sure.
yeah, but yeah, it's just yeah, a lot of like um under recognized things that moms do, like things that now that I'm a mom, I appreciate my own mom more. I'm like, wow, she had to do stuff like this for us. Like when I was little, like she had to deal with me. Like I was a very sad baby. I always wanted to be held. And my youngest, she's 6 months now. Um, I would say she's probably not as sad as I was, but she definitely likes to be held. And it's really hard to get other things done around the house when either you're holding a baby or listening to a baby cry in the bouncer.
Yeah.
So, like thinking about, wow, my mom had to do this for me too. And she had to hold me while she was like washing dishes or whatever. Like, wow, that's hard. How did she like maintain such strong back muscles? It's difficult wearing a baby. And anyway, so yeah, just things that you don't really realize unless you're in it, like how hard it is. Like how hard it is to understand a 2-year-old that can only use, he doesn't have a full vocabulary. And some of the things he says have a very strong baby accent to it where I'm like, I don't know what word that is. That's hard too. You're like trying to interpret this little human's um, words that he's trying to communicate to you what he desires. That's difficult. People, that's something that I think a lot of people would get very frustrated with it really quickly. But when you're with that 24/7, um, you have to build up those skills. There are certain skills that come with being a mom, um, and they're not natural to me. but the Lord is sanctifying me and helping me grow in all these things. So yeah.
I feel like I hear you describing that skill of attunement, right? Where you're like kind of studying this little person out. Oh, when
Sure.
they make this face, that's what this means. Or when
Yes.
they cry this way, it means they want a bottle. But when they cry that way, they're just mad. They're just like studying that individual child and the
Yeah.
things that make them unique. And it is such a beautiful skill moms have. That incredible way that compassionate moms know their child. They know what their different little sounds mean and their
Yeah.
teeny little vocabulary means. And it's just such a beautiful thing, such a reminder of like how deeply God loves and knows each of us. Because I'm sure before God that we're a lot like toddlers sometimes,
Oh yeah. Oh my goodness. I think about that all the time. Like my son, so he'll be 2 next month. And he he's doing better with obeying, but sometimes he'll obey and he'll like wail as he's obeying. Like he'll do what I asked him to do, but he's like, and I'm like, I feel like I do that with the Lord, you know,
Yes.
just not doing it with a glad heart, not serving the Lord with gladness. but
Mhm.
but yeah, it's convicting when you see yourself in a 2-year old. That's for sure. Yeah.
Motherhood is so beautiful and it really changes our world. I heard it said by someone that the Pro-Life movement has tried a lot of different strategies to end abortion. And I think in order to really end abortion, we have to understand why it started. And, I'm sure you've gone deep in this in your own research and writing you've done for World, but tragically, there have always been some parts of culture that didn't love or want some children. So
Mhm.
abortion wasn't really practiced as it is now, like as far as entering women's body cavities until like
Sure.
1840s is when we learned that germs exist. So then that was the only time that people could actually perform an abortion without it killing both the mom and baby. Because before, like early forms of abortion would kill both because they didn't know germs existed and sepsis would ensue and all this stuff would happen. Um, so a lot of times in like history, infanticide was practiced instead of abortion. And so it's just a tragedy when we look at history and realize that people voluntarily harmed children through infanticide and then later through abortion. And so we kind of have like the modern version of infanticide with abortion. And so someone posed this idea to me, Dr. Carrie Grass. She posed the idea that if we want to end abortion, part of what we have to do is we have to value motherhood. Because
Mhm.
if someone is not going to kill their child, they're going to have to raise them or have someone, place them for adoption. Those are the only two options: is to raise them or place them for adoption. Those are like the only
Yeah.
things we can do in this situation. Um, and nobody is going to want to raise an unexpected child if we have a low view of motherhood.
Mhm.
If we think that becoming a mom is like the worst thing that ever happened, I know this one neighbor and all she does is hold a screaming infant and their house is a mess. You know what I mean? Like if it's always like characterized as like, oh, like she seems to have lost everything she cares about by doing this. It's so interesting. So many young women have that view of motherhood. I was talking with a woman I knew once who faced an unplanned pregnancy, but thank God she chose life. But she was talking about how as soon as she was sharing with her friends that she was pregnant, she said, "Well, it turns out my husband and I we had all these plans that we were going to travel. We will not be able to travel now. Like they're never going to travel again." And it was like, like I was a homeschooled child. So I'm like, we traveled. Like it still happens when you have kids. Like I don't think your entire life is over. Like I don't
Yeah.
think every little fun thing you've ever done is now gone because
Mhm.
there's a child. Like a lot of people get creative when they have kids and they find many ways to enjoy their life with a
Yeah.
child. Like
Mhm.
I'm just gonna take a wild guess at Leah. You probably don't just sit in your house on your couch your entire day. Like I bet you
No.
go to the park. I bet you and
Yeah.
your husband sometimes probably go on vacation with the kids. Like you
Yes.
don't just like become so sedentary that like now we all have depression together and we just sit on the couch and we all wish that, we were not in toddler land. Like I'm sure there are days that are like that, but I don't
Sure.
imagine probably not every day is like that. But we just view motherhood that way, and it really contributes in history to infanticide occurring, and then in the modern era to abortion taking place because if a person is facing an unplanned pregnancy and their only view of motherhood is like, oh, this is extreme martyrdom in a way where you lose every single thing that matters to you, say goodbye to your, career and goodbye to any professional accomplishments you cared about, and then now you raise this child as if it's like the worst thing that could happen to you. I think that makes sense why that drives abortion.
Yeah. Oh, totally. Yeah. Well, and I think about the work that I did at World, and I mean, I'm really thankful for the time there. I feel like it was meaningful work, but really, there is no like, as far as from my own experience, there's nothing quite so meaningful as seeing this little human that you're raising, like seeing them learn things and seeing like I've been trying to teach my kids or my son, like my 6 month old, she can't talk yet. So so not her yet, but I've been trying to teach my son like some scripture memory, and it's amazing the things that his little brain picks up. Like he can remember um some little, I'll ask him like little questions about like who made everything, and he'll say God, and we'll talk about like we'll review Bible verses like holy, holy, holy are you, Lord God Almighty. And even at 2, he can still say most of the verse. And that's just so meaningful to see like how the Lord's using me to shape his mind. And I pray that he becomes a follower of Christ. I have no say in that ultimately, but um, the Lord definitely uses parents to shape their children. This is a really crucial time of my kids' lives, and I feel like I've never been so influential as I am now. Simply because I'm with these kids like all day, every day. Um, yeah, and it's tiring, but it's also so fun. Like there's so many silly things that happen all the time. Like today, my son figured out how to blow into his little toy harmonica, so he was pretty excited about that.
So cute. I love that.
Yeah, and they're just these little delights that, yeah, it's very special. It's a special time. So,
Being a mom really is something that's empowering. I love how you said, I've never felt so influential.
mhm,
That's the opposite, I think, of the message we get in the culture about motherhood. But
definitely.
motherhood is so deeply impacting and it
Mhm.
does change children's lives. And really, it's such a thing that impacts generations. Like you've talked about your own mom a few times in this
Yeah.
interview. It sounds like she really impacted you a lot.
Oh
And
yeah.
it sounds like you're reflecting on it more because now you're raising your little ones. And
Yeah.
it's just the truth that our families impact us in such a big way. And the broader culture, an idea I have, I'd be curious if maybe this is something, maybe you hold this idea too. Like the broader culture, right, it's just, it's this big thing, but it seems like it's just a mix of a lot of people's homes. So whatever
Mhm.
they took
Yeah.
from that, good or bad, that's what it is. And I feel like part of why we have a pro-abortion culture is I do think, obviously some children are aborted, which is so awful. And I think some children are, thank God, not aborted. And then sometimes those families didn't receive the support they should have. Maybe they didn't go to the pregnancy center. They didn't get any kind of foundation for how, despite the fact that this was an unexpected situation, like this child is a gift. And some children, I think, were raised feeling unwanted. And so I
Mhm.
think that kind of has built a little bit of this culture of like endorsing abortion. It's okay. I don't want to have children when I'm an adult because my parents didn't enjoy raising me. I don't want to do something like that because, like I'm not going to enjoy it either. So I wonder if our broader culture and how broken it is, if part of it is just like we're seeing a lot of people's homes coming
Mhm.
out.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And if you think about it, if you'd ask each person individually, each person in the world, who was the most influential person in your life, you're unlikely to hear like, oh, this CEO or that CEO, or even this pop star or that like, musician or that like football player or whatever. And you're more likely to hear like my parents, right? So either for good or for bad, the parents are some of the most influential people in someone's lives, not the people who are successful in the world's terms, like successful and famous and rich. Like those people, yeah, you're not really going to hear them be named if you ask somebody who's the most influential person in your life. And so, yeah, it's exactly what you're saying. It's like the homes coming out into the culture. And um, yeah, that's why, I mean, it all started with Adam and Eve, just one little family. And what that's led to. One bad decision in one family has affected a whole history. Um, so, yeah, I agree with that.
Well, I'm super encouraged. You're building your home and you're pointing your kids to Christ and you're showing them a ton of love, which makes an eternal difference. It's so beautiful. We're all impacted by the generations of our family. I've thought about it many times. You ever have it where you reflect on a family member and you're like, oh, I'm more like them than I thought I was. I've been realizing I'm more like my maternal grandmother. Like she's very strong-willed and she'd speak her mind, and you don't want to be in trouble with her because she's like gonna let you know if you cross the line. That's a lot like her.
Yeah.
And we just are all so impacted by the people in our family. So when we strive to live lives to glorify God in those small and mundane tasks of scrubbing the dishes again and
Yeah.
making your bed again and just like going through those things that don't feel like, oh, a CEO thing that people are going to notice on the cover of a magazine, like it's impacting generations that haven't even been born yet. Because my grandma is out there being, a Christian who loves God, and she has like the strong personality, and just certain things she was doing and the way she was like handling her family like impact me now. And that's how it is for all of us. Like the choices we're making now don't just impact us, they impact future generations. And it's
Yeah.
good to have a broad view of
Mhm.
how we impact people.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And I really appreciate people like you too, Cassidy, just using the season of life that God has put you in for his glory and to make a difference. Like, that's amazing. So thank you.
Oh, thank you. That's so kind of you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, for sure.
So, kind of as we wrap up our conversation a little bit, I would love to ask you, obviously, you've developed these incredible skills as a pro-life journalist and communicator. There are people listening in who would like to become better pro-life communicators. So, what are your top tips? Kind of a broad question, right? Of like just generally being a better communicator, but also like better pro-life writing and maybe better pro-life like podcast or speaking, because I know that you were using a whole lot of those skills. So, what are some of those top recommendations you have for pro-lifers to get better at how they share the pro-life message?
Yeah, I think one big thing is you just have to learn to be a good listener. Because especially for me, I came into the pro-life beat with little medical knowledge, little legal or political knowledge. I just had to listen, ask good questions, and learn. And you kind of have to just do that if you're gonna, if in order to be able to kind of write effectively or communicate effectively about all of the many facets involved in this issue, you just have to be willing to learn and listen well. Uh, and I would say too, I think sometimes pro-life groups are really hesitant to approach like the more difficult questions, like we were talking about the life of the mother question. I know a big thing that came up in a lot of my reporting is this conflict between different pro-life groups and like pro-life and abolitionist groups, and pro-life groups don't want to talk bad about each other, and I understand that, but I think it's it's difficult to get down to the truth of an issue if you're not willing to talk about the controversial things, even among people who agree that abortion is terrible. So I would say, don't be afraid to talk about those hard questions and get to the bottom of it. Um, I think that's really important. Um, and um, yeah, what else? So you were talking about like speaking and right. Can you reiterate your question?
Yeah, I know that you had also done some like pro-life podcasts for
Okay,
the
yeah.
world. So I'd love to hear like what makes a great pro-life podcast. What do you recommend for people to make those better? And
Yeah.
then you did a ton of writing. So how can people do better pro-life writing on like events and that type of thing?
Yeah. So another thing I would say is that it's easy to kind of share your opinion on things, but it's hard to share stories, and it takes a lot more work to share those like really intimate stories of people who have gone through like abortions or difficult pregnancies and things like that. So I'd say the fewer opinions thrown around, and I know I've shared a lot of opinions on this podcast today, but the fewer opinions out there and the more like detailed accounts of true events that have happened, I think that's a really powerful thing. Being able to share true stories and talk about real people and real experiences that they've had. So yeah, and kind of related to that with podcasting, I think there's a lot of like, yeah, there's definitely a space for like conversations like we're having right now, but the kinds of podcast pieces that I would work on for World we would try to get audio of like interviews. And often I would try to go in person somewhere and get like audio of what's happening. And that really can like bring people in to a story in a way that just talking about ideas, it can't replicate that, you know? Um, so like, for instance, I wrote about IVF, and did like this long piece about IVF and this woman's decision to do IVF and then how she regretted it in the end. And hearing her story and kind of digging into, yeah, just the IVF industry and how it works and all of that. It was really her story that kind of drove home to me my convictions on the IVF issue. Stories and personal narratives and just like getting to know someone really well through a story or an article or a podcast, that I feel like that's where like the change of a lot of people's minds can happen, and the heart changes can, like, the Lord can use things like that to change people's hearts on issues. So I would say focus on those, focus on those stories, and asking hard questions. And often there is not a simple answer, and sometimes you just gotta be okay with that. But I think that's also where scripture can come in. If there is something that's really complicated and you just can't explain something that has happened, that's where scripture can come in to give answers that, just a human's opinion, that's not good enough. We need to know what the Lord thinks. So, yeah.
Those are excellent tips, and I've really seen you apply them because I think there've been two different times I was honored to be interviewed by you during World or for World,
Yeah.
and I can totally see ways you were using that. Like we went to a trial related to Dr. Monica Miller somehow, and I saw you in there like recording the audio of, talking to Dr. Miller outside the courtroom. That was really fascinating. And then once you interviewed me while we were driving in a car, and so you talked about how together we're driving in a car and blah blah blah. And
Yeah.
that actually did make such fascinating stories. And you're right that it is really common in today's era I mean, like social media is this, right? Kind of an opinion machine where you just like, oh, look, it's their opinion. But storytelling is a different art. And I appreciate how you pointed out kind of the difference there.
Thanks. Yeah. Yeah.
I realized I missed this question earlier and I want to throw it in because it's a really cool part of your professional life. You actually wrote a book. Would you
Yes.
tell us a little bit about that, why you chose that specific subject and what it was about?
Mhm. Yeah, so I was asked by my former boss, Marvin Olasky, to help him co-author this book on the history of abortion in America. So it wasn't my idea, it was Marvin's idea. But he wanted me to help him with like, it was kind of a rewrite of an earlier book that he had done. So he had done a lot of the legwork talking about the history of abortion in previous books that he wrote, but this book was going to add some new information that had come to light since he had written those the past book. But it was also going to update the book because I think the original one he wrote was like from 1995 or something like that. So he wanted an update in the book of like what's happened in the abortion narrative since around the mid 90s, which is when I was born, to the present day, which was when Roe v. Wade was overturned. So I was kind of writing that last section of the book, talking about what's happened in politics and in public opinion and like pregnancy centers, like what developments have come up since then. So yeah, so that's what I did, and Marvin wrote the portions about the history of abortion in America starting in the 1600s. So he is the one like in a lot of the historical archives looking at like ancient court cases, ancient court cases, and all those things. But yeah, we wrote about the first um, kind of story in the book is about the first recorded abortion in America from the 1650s. So, and that was really interesting for me because I didn't write that portion of the book, but kind of giving Marvin some feedback on his sections of the book. It was really interesting seeing just how prevalent abortion, well, I guess not prevalent, but how abortion was still a part of the culture in some way, even back in the 1600s. And in that first recorded abortion, it was a case of a forced abortion where a man put like a abortive herb or something on a poached egg and forced his servant girl to eat it because she was pregnant with his child and he didn't want, this baby. But it was interesting seeing how the communities around these people would react when there were abortions. And you're just, if you go on any like pro-abortion website or like mainstream media or whatever. And I was actually listening to a podcast the other day that was talking about how, oh yeah, abortion was acceptable in early America up until quickening, which is like 5 months when the mom can kind of feel the baby moving inside of her. They'll say, oh yeah, it was always acceptable. Like it's because of these power hungry doctors that midwives got pushed out of, performing abortions, and they criminalized abortion. Like it was all just a power struggle. But looking at this record, like my co-author did, of these early recorded abortions, the communities around these people reacted with horror to cases of abortion, even before quickening, when the mom knows that there's a baby like moving inside of her. And there was like this one case where a man went on trial for murder for forcing an abortion on a woman whose baby then died, and a midwife saw the baby and could testify like around how old the baby was when the baby came out, and it was definitely before 5 months, and that man still went on trial for murder. So it was interesting seeing how the historical record actually contradicts a lot of what you're hearing from pro-abortion groups about, what early Americans thought about abortion. It's never been seen as, oh, it's fine. Even before they had ultrasounds and they could actually see the baby growing inside of a mother's womb, they still knew that it was a a wrong thing. It was murder. So yeah. Anyway, that's some of what I took away from that time writing that book with Marvin. I learned a lot from his portion. I learned a lot from the writing I did for my more current update of the book, but I learned way more from just reading his parts. So yeah, it was very interesting.
An amazing project. It's so important for us to know the history of abortion so
Mhm.
that we can understand how to create a world free from it.
Yeah.
So you're talking about, as you mentioned, like this book and what's covered in it, the very first recorded abortion in America. I would be so curious, did the mom survive? And did the
Yes,
baby
she did.
survive? Did they both survive?
Yeah, the mom survived, the baby did not survive.
Well, that's so sad.
At least that's how I'm remembering it right now. It's been a while since I've read the book. But there were definitely other cases though, because my co-author went through a lot of other early abortion cases, and there were plenty where the mom didn't survive. And it's interesting that often those, especially, as you go on in the record, often those cases where the mom didn't survive were more likely to get like a lot of media attention because there was, a dead woman. And I think you kind of see the same thing today where um, if there is a dead baby, it's almost like, oh well, it's kind of what you're talking about with the babies that everyone was freaking out about Lauren Handy having those babies in her apartment. Um, like you were saying, it happens at abortion facilities around the world all the time. And yet it's not big news until something kind of strange happens, like something different, like, oh, the babies show up somewhere else or a mom dies or something. And even those stories are getting suppressed a lot in today's media. But early on in earlier America, and like definitely as abortions were becoming more common and there were actually abortionists as opposed to just men giving women abortive herbs or whatever, um, you're more likely to hear about these stories if the woman dies, um, than if just the baby dies. But yes, in this first instance, as I recall, the baby dies, but the mother survived, and she was actually, there that the man that impregnated her went on trial. And she was like kind of testifying in the case as they were trying to decide if he should be convicted for murder. And he wasn't ultimately, because there's not sufficient evidence to prove that there was a pregnancy in the first place or a baby in the first place. But the woman, I remember, recognized what had happened as being a sin, like abortion being a sin. And obviously she hadn't chosen it. It was forced upon her, but she recognized that it was even worse than, you know, the fact that they had gotten pregnant out of wedlock. So, yeah.
Those early abortions are tragic to hear about because a lot of times it was men forcing on women. So, right, we're
Yep.
talking about probably a situation where like maybe there was domestic violence already before that
Mm-hmm.
happened because like these are abusive men that are willing to harm their
Yeah.
child in some of these
Yeah.
reasons. So, it's
Mm-hmm.
devastating the history of abortion. But
Totally.
yeah, love that you put all of that work into that project. What are some of the things you took away from? I know you said you studied more of the current history of
Mm-hmm.
abortion. So when you think about that part of the book that you were writing, what are some of the greatest applications you took from what you learned? And what do you think the pro-life movement can learn from the more recent history of our movement?
Oh, hmm. It's hard because a lot of it, I'm getting it kind of muddled in my mind with a lot of the reporting I did after the book came out. um, oh, but I guess even speaking more generally from just my experiences reporting, even outside of like writing this book, I would say um, definitely the work that pregnancy centers do is really important. Like serving women in need, allowing them to see the baby growing inside of them. Like that visual is really helpful and can really change some minds. But on the flip side, I also wrote, I don't remember if this made it into the book or if this was after the book came out, but I definitely spent some time reporting on how even ultrasounds, like there's a limitation to what seeing an unborn child can do to like mentally. Like, is that enough to change someone's mind on abortion? Not always. Like, we like to think of it as kind of being the silver bullet for the pro-life movement, but it's not. um Ultimately, abortion is a heart issue, and I do think I did write about this in the book. Ultimately, it's a heart issue. I remember this was actually a pregnancy center director in Florida was the one who first kind of brought this to my mind, talking about how women can sometimes just have a hard heart towards their children. Like we were talking about with the feminist issue, they can even think like, oh, well, this is just a problem I have to solve, and I'm not going to let God into this. Like, I'm not going to let God have a say in the decision I make. I'm just going to make the decision for myself. So that's a big takeaway for me is we can't neglect the spiritual questions when it comes to the issue of abortion. Um, I, yeah, I think it's really important. Like the science is really important. The technology of the ultrasound is really important, but you run into a wall with those. You can't bring someone totally to the point of being willing to give up so much of their life to allow this usually unwanted, unplanned for child to continue living. And that's why it's a spiritual issue. Um, so I guess that would be my big takeaway from a lot of my reporting, is, yeah, like I said, not neglecting the spiritual questions.
That's an important application and not one we hear super often. And I think it's a great reminder that prayer makes a difference. Because
Mhm.
if abortion is a spiritual issue, then when we pray and we ask God to move in the spiritual realm, which, if you can imagine how demonic it must be to murder a baby, this sweet little child that cannot defend themselves, there's got to be a lot of spiritual warfare over every abortion
Oh
decision.
yeah. Hmm.
So
Yeah.
being able even to just hear what you've said about how hard-hearted some women are towards their own child, thinking about when we pray, God knows every individual woman and he knows every mom facing an unplanned pregnancy and the choices that they're thinking about and the things they're looking up on the internet, like if they're going to go to Planned Parenthood's website or if they're going to go to optionline.org instead. God sees all those little decisions and those things that lead from one thing to the next. And so when we pray, God does intervene spiritually. And so
Oh yeah, well, and that's not to say that like women who get abortions are the only hard-hearted people in the world. Like I am hard-hearted. Like that's why I need Christ in my life. Like that's why I needed his sacrifice to take the punishment for my sin because I'm hard-hearted. And like I said, I think I said this earlier, how like I can see so many just sinful thoughts and sinful attitudes and sinful heart attitudes come out of myself, especially in motherhood, like just a lot of selfishness. And that's the same heart attitude that leads to abortion. It's just like in a different form. Like Christ talked about in the Gospels how if you look at a woman lustfully in your heart, like that's the same as an adultery. If you hate your brother, that's the same as murdering him. Like it all goes back to our heart attitudes. And if we have hatred in our hearts towards someone in our family, even if they're born, like that's still kind of that abortion mentality. You know what I'm saying? So it's so much deeper than like just people who are facing unplanned pregnancies. It's just everybody. Everybody needs a new heart. We all need Christ. We all need to be renewed. Um, and yeah, so I think I'm really thankful for people who are evangelistic, like who are pro-life and going out to save babies, but also going out to evangelize and to tell people about the gospel and to tell people about Christ. I think those things, I know it's kind of like controversial, like which thing do we talk about? How do we approach this question? But I really do think that gets to the heart of it because everybody needs to have a new heart. And yeah, we're not gonna solve abortion, or we're not gonna get rid of abortion without sharing the gospel. So yeah, I'll just stop there.
true though, we need God and
Yeah,
we need him in order to be changed ourselves, to be set free from that hard-heartedness. Like you're
yeah,
saying, we're facing unplanned pregnancy or not. We all need
yes,
our hearts to be transformed by God.
exactly. Yeah,
Leah, thank you so much for joining the podcast today. It's been an incredible honor to hear about your career you've had in pro-life media and the amazing work you're continuing to do now as a mom and as someone who's writing it when you're able to. And I just hope you know that you just bring a lot of joy to the world and you're a very kind person. I know that every time I've worked with you in the professional setting, you've always just shown a lot of love to others. And it says in scripture that, if we do all these great things, right, but we don't have love, then, we're just a resounding gong. We're doing nothing, basically, right? Nothing
yeah.
helpful. And I appreciate that the work you've done has been in love and it makes a big impact on the world.
Thank you so much. And thanks so much for having me on. It was kind of a blast from the past for me. So sorry I couldn't answer all your questions with the freshest memory, but that was really fun. Thanks for having me.
Of course. I'm so glad you were here and you have so much insight and depth. So definitely don't sell yourself short, even though like I've heard from moms that there's such a thing as motherhood brain where like, your brain feels different after you have kids. So
It
that
really
might be
does.
true, but I want you to know like you're so sharp and you have so much depth and knowledge. Like it is all there, even if like, chasing your toddler around the house feels like the latest thing you've been thinking about. So
Thank you. Thank you so much.
of course.